Today I'm going to be talking about Betaflight and specifically the new GPS Rescue improvements in version 4.4. Now, Betaflight has always had fail-safe features and we've had GPS Rescue in Betaflight for quite some time. But if we're going to be completely honest, it never really worked very well at all, and whilst it did offer a GPS type return to home, there was a lot that could be improved. Today though, we have that improvement. There has been a massive amount of work done by the Betaflight dev team on improving the performance on GPS Rescue, and today I'm going to share with you my experiences having tested and tried it and seen how it actually works. Now, this video really isn't going to be a tutorial, but I am going to walk you through my experience of turning it on, trying it, tweaking it, and then at the end getting the settings to where I feel gives me a really good fail-safe feature moving forward. Now, I know there will always be lots of questions around why would you want GPS Rescue or GPS features on a racing or a freestyle quad? Well, with the price of flight controllers and components getting more expensive and many people transferring their gear over to digital FPV, we all now have aircraft that are costing much more than they did before, and having a reliable fail-safe, in my opinion, is an absolute must in today's world. Anyway, let's get on with it and let's try out the new features and see how we get on. Now, the plan is to test this a few times, probably 3 or 4, to observe the behaviour. What I'm going to do is take off from a single point, fly the aircraft out a little bit, and then manually trigger the failsafe and see what the actual behaviour is, and then also see what the accuracy is like. Now, I've been out at the field today testing a number of things, and this Betaflight test is just one of them. For this, we're going to be using this quad here with a standard GPS module on the back. It's a Betaflight 4.4 build. It's actually the Speedy B frame, and we've now got the Brain FPV Radix in there as well, and they've recently updated their firmware for 4.42, meaning that we're all ready to go. Now, at this point, I've simply just enabled the GPS Rescue option. The only other thing I've changed is the option to allow me to arm without GPS lock. However, everything else remains as it is out of the factory settings. Okay, so I've put a battery down next to the aircraft. That is going to be the takeoff point. We'll use that as a marker to see where it comes back to and how far off it actually is. Okay, so let's head out. And what we're going to do now is see how it performs. Now, I'm going to head off not too far. I'm going to put a bit of height up as well, just so I know everything's okay. I'm going to trigger it from the middle of the field here, and the reason is, at least if something goes wrong with the triggering of the return to home, it's just going to drop here and not do anything else dull. So I'm just trying to try and reach down and find my buttons. For some reason I can't actually find them on my remote. 1 second. There we go. So I'm going to trigger it now. We can then see that the failsafe has kicked in, and we're then going to see how it performs overall. We've got it coming back home. It's heading back towards us. You can see us located down there. We can see that it's come over ahead. Betaflight started the descent. We've got it coming back down and in. And there we go. It's landed. Okay, so distance-wise, we have the battery by there, and then we have the aircraft there, roughly pacing it out. We've got 1, 2, 3, probably 3.5 meters to the side, which I'll be honest isn't too bad at all. It's much better than we'd had on Betaflight in the past, but let's try it again. Okay, so what we're going to do this time is arm first of all and let it sit there for a second before we take off.
And then I'm going to go straight up and then head out a little bit from there. And then we'll see how it again performs this time. Last flight I accidentally triggered angle mode rather than return to home because I was doing it blind. I haven't got this on a switch. I'm using the buttons on the bottom of the Boxer remote. So rather than using the actual switch itself, I'm using that, and I had a bit of confusion around that. So what we're going to do is again head off over here. I'm not going too far because again I still don't fully trust this. So what we're going to do now is use our button. There we go, triggered. What's actually interesting is the drop at the point of entering return to home. I don't know if you noticed that, but there's a drop in the aircraft as the return to home triggers. That's something interesting I need to explore a little bit more, because that's not something I was expecting and I don't quite understand what that's about. We're just going to keep an eye on it this time and see what it does on the way in. It's clearly heading back. Now the big difference on this flight is that we did give it more time before taking off, and that's going to be interesting to see if that's made a difference to the accuracy. You can now hear the aircraft coming in. Okay, so on that final run with the longer takeoff time, again the battery's there, the aircraft's landed there, so we're talking 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 meters that time. I'd say it's definitely closer than it was the last time, but I can't say for sure that it's a massive difference overall. Now I'm taking off on this one with 12 sats, and the last thing I'm just going to check on this is what that drop is like. So what I'm going to actually do is fly it out the way and pump the throttle a little bit before that kicks in. I'll head over this way, but also then see what the recovery is like in the event of the failsafe. Although I'm using a failsafe mode, I'm not using the trigger as a result of going out of signal, so the recovery behavior is going to be a little bit different. But what I'm going to do is just head over here a minute. We're going to then trigger it. There's definitely a drop behavior as it enters it and changes what it wants to do. Because I'm in the mode now, I'm moving the sticks around and nothing has changed. What I need to do is do some tests in failsafe. I'm probably not going to be doing that today. But if I then just feel down and return the mode back to the normal mode, like I have there, I'm back now in full control and I'm able to return the aircraft as I normally would. Now, I'm not, as I've said, gonna test this today in that anger mode, whereas, you know, force it to lose signal. I think that's something we're gonna have to trust. And then the recovery of that would likely be the same as we've seen before. So again, I'm just going to fly over here, head this way, trigger it. It definitely has a drop in altitude as you trigger that failsafe, but it then recovers from that, heads around, and then returns back home, as you've seen there, finds its bearings and heads back towards the home point, which it's now doing.
Now, as you've seen, GPS Rescue absolutely works a lot better than it did before, but as I showed in that video, there is this strange drop behaviour. Now, that is caused by me, because I didn't actually follow the instructions. All I did was turn on GPS Rescue and go and try it. And whilst it works, there is a lot more settings that you can change to improve the actual behaviour, because you've got the stage 1 behaviour and stage 2, and that drop was the aircraft in the stage 1. Now, there is a fantastic wiki that's been put together by the Betaflight dev team, and there's even a video by Ivan, one of the Betaflight devs, who covers the Betaflight GPS Rescue in all of the detail and tells you exactly what you need to do. And I strongly suggest you watch and read these before the setup. However, what I'm going to do next is walk you through the changes that I made to improve things. Now, if we take a look at my Betaflight settings under failsafe, we'll start to see where things went wrong. All I did was simply configure the GPS rescue option and set the minimum sats down to 6. What I didn't do, though, is any other configuration of what I want it to do before it enters stage 2 or GPS rescue. For instance, Betaflight enters stage 1 failsafe first. That is the actions on this left-hand side of the page. And then after a specific time, which is called the guard time shown here, which is currently set to 1.5 seconds, it will then trigger stage 2. If we have a look at what the default options are for stage 1, you'll see that the channels are set to auto for roll, pitch, yaw and throttle, and hold for the aux channels. This means that Betaflight will hold whatever mode you were in before, but for the channels they will actually change their values. For instance, roll, pitch and yaw will move to the midpoint or 1500 PWM if yours is set as standard, but throttle changes to low. That is why when I was triggering the failsafe, you would see the aircraft dip before it entered stage 2 as a result of this 1.5 seconds guard time. That is why my aircraft began to drop, and that's why I was seeing the issues that I was seeing. When configuring your failsafe settings in Betaflight, it's not only important to configure the GPS rescue, but you also need to take into account these settings on what you want the aircraft to do before it enters that stage 2 behavior. For instance, we could drop the amount of time it takes to enter stage 2 down to 1 second or even less, but it is important that you also do configuration over here as well to ensure that you're giving yourself the best possibility of recovery. For instance, if you're always flying somewhere where there's clear space above, you can configure this to actually change the flight mode to, say, stabilized, and then pump the throttle so the aircraft would level up and gain altitude. You would do this simply by changing the throttle from auto to a set, and then you can choose the set value that you want for the throttle. So rather than it go to low, you can set your own value that you want the throttle to go to. And then we can also set a value for our mode channel as well. For me, that is aux 4. So again, we can set it to set and then tell it what PWM value we want for that mode. So for instance, if I do go over to my modes, you can see angle is currently set at the high-end PWM scale, so that is going to be on aux 4. So what we would then do under the failsafe settings is set aux 4 to go to set, and then we would set that at 1800 PWM. That way, it would then enter angle mode. We can then set our throttle to set as well. We can set that to the value we want, so we could set it to, say, mid throttle or more. And in the event of the stage 1 failsafe, what would then happen is the aircraft would enter angle mode, then pump the throttle at the same time, and then after the default guard time, enter the preset option, which would be GPS rescue, and then begin the return to home process. These settings on the left-hand side will dictate what happens before this guard interval time elapses. You can reduce this so it pretty much enters stage 2 straight away. And what's best advice around all of this is to set your stage 1 to an emergency response action, i.e. set your aircraft to level mode, stabilized angle, and then begin to increase altitude for safety, or hover, depending on what you want. And then after the guard time, have your recovery mode kick in, whether that be drop to the ground safely, land, or GPS rescue. About the only other option here you should pay attention to is angle. This is the maximum angle the aircraft will bank to when doing its return to home. currently set at 45. Again, it's an option you may wish to change depending on how windy it may be and really how fast you want your aircraft to fly home, because remember, its forward speed is going to be directly in relation to its bank angle. So if you did want it to have more capability of flying home, you're going to want to increase that to allow it to fly faster. So it was time to do the testing again. Now I've done the configuration. Now the purpose of these flights was less about the home point accuracy and more about understanding how it now behaved with the new stage 1 settings in place. So I took it for a quick fly, didn't take it out too far this time, just to another location that I do use now and again, just to give a bit of a feel for how it performs. Then it was simply a case of triggering the failsafe and seeing what its behavior actually was. Now you can see here with the new setup that it behaves very, very differently. It really does now just increase the throttle. We no longer have that dip. It drops into that level mode and then kicks the return to home in and brings it back. It is a lot better like this than it was in my original setup. Here you'll also see how accurate it was on this section of return to home at this location. Again, it was landing away from the battery a few meters, very similar actually to what it was doing before, to the right about 10 past the hour, but it's much better than we'd seen from Betaflight before. This next flight was to just demo it going behind some trees just to see that it did behave as expected. Now again, I did manually trigger here the failsafe, but I wanted just to see how it would behave in situations like this with trees around it, things like this. I didn't go in too low or deep, but you can start to see the DJI signal breaking up. I trigger the RX loss and then it punches out, hits that self-level mode and then returns to home. All of the maneuvers you can see the aircraft making here are the Betaflight maneuvers. There is no pilot input at all. It is simply bringing itself back as we would expect it to. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on the new Betaflight 4.4 GPS Rescue, I have to say I am really impressed with the improvements that have been made. It's really nice to now see a more traditional GPS rescue. We've not got that aircraft doing a sort of a semi-controlled crash. It is very much flying over where it thinks the home point is and landing. The real impressive thing is that there is no compass on this aircraft. It is all using GPS, and because of that, you're not quite getting that very smooth behavior that you'd see on, say, a DJI drone, but what you are getting is what appears to be a much more reliable fail-safe action with the aircraft doing what we want it to do. Now, as I showed you at the start, if you don't configure this properly, it isn't going to behave in the way you need it to. It was with the feedback from my community and some people online that said to me, go in the settings, change that guard 1 settings as I've showed you. And the nice thing about that is that you can set the aircraft to enter a self-level mode and punch out. Obviously, you're only going to want it to do that if it's safe to do so above, but it is good that you can enable that as that first trigger action. So you're getting out of acro mode into a stabilized mode, punching out away from anything that you're near, and then allowing that GPS rescue to kick in. And then the aircraft takes that point forward, flies back to the home point and lands. Now, accuracy rise, as you've seen, it isn't landing exactly where it took off. In my tests, it does seem to always land at the sort of this 10 past position compared to the takeoff direction. And it can be anywhere between sort of 3 and 5-6 meters away. So you want to make sure that if you're using GPS Rescue, your home area is large enough to accommodate that. But what is great to see is that we are getting that fly, across and land behaviour. You might have seen in the last flight that it sort of hopped a little bit before going down. I don't know if that was the baro sensor picking up things a little bit odd, but overall it is performing much, much better than we've seen in the past. Now, I want to personally say a massive thank you to the Betaflight devs who have worked on this, and actually the whole Betaflight team. It is fantastic to see this. I've complained about it forever, and I'd strongly suggest either going into the configurator and clicking the button over here to donate, or going to the Betaflight website where you can scroll to the bottom and there are options to donate via PayPal or via Patreon as well. If you're flying Betaflight, it is a free open source software, and with these improvements, the dev team really do deserve your support. They always deserve support. Any open source dev team deserves people's support. But please, if you're going to download the new one, why not head over there and make a donation? There is a link to the website to be able to do that in the description of the video. There's also a link to Ivan's video as well. Now, as I said at the start, this was never designed to be a tutorial. I am not an expert on Betaflight, but I did want to share with you my thoughts. If you have found this video interesting, please do make sure you are subscribed, and if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do check out the links to Patreon as well as buy me a coffee in the description. I can only keep making content on this channel through the support of my patrons, and I want to say a massive thank you from me to everyone who has supported the channel so far. Finally, I just want to say I'm really interested in knowing what you think about this, so please let me know in the comment section. I'll try and answer any questions you may have as well. If you're not running 4.4, I'd strongly suggest heading towards it. If you're flying digital, at least now things are looking much better from a fail-safe point of view, and hopefully it'll prevent you from losing your expensive VTX should something go wrong. Anyway, that's it from me. Stay safe. I'll speak to you soon.